Hello friends, my name is Bintou and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be all about my reading for the first quarter of the year, and I'm going to be talking about my reading stats, and also I'm going to talk about my most favorite books that I read for the first quarter of the year. Hopefully I can compare what I've done so far to kind of some of the goals that I set out at the very beginning of the year. I'm on track to meet some of them, a little off on some others. Some of the other random goals I had, like, maybe posting to Instagram more. Well, if you follow me on Instagram, you probably see that I literally haven't posted anything since the start of the year. So the good news is there's still 3 quarters left. So let's jump straight into the total number of books that I read. And I read a grand total of 33 books for the first quarter of the year. Considering my yearly goal is, I think it was 52 books. I mean, I knew I was gonna reach that, but like I'm definitely very much on track to hit that at this point. I'm pretty satisfied with this total number. In terms of the breakdown, I read a total of 10 books in January, 13 books in February, and then 10 books in March. February had the really large high with 13 books. That was because in February I had my wisdom tooth surgery, so I had a lot of downtime, and I also had midwinter break that month as well. So I just had more time to read. March, I'm genuinely surprised. I was actually out of town for a couple weeks in March, but I was still able to get a good number of books read. I would say 10 books a month is about average for me. That's right around where I would want to be, 10 books a month. Next, I want to jump into some of my author stats. So looking at the authors that I read, the first thing I have here is gender. So of the 33 books that I read, 27 of them were from unique authors. So there were some repeat authors on here. So I'm going to be looking at a total of 27 authors. And of the 27, 20 of them were female, 7 were male, and I had no non-binary. So about 75% of my reading is female authors. I really didn't set a goal in terms of author gender. That's not something that I tracked last year, and I'm tracking it this year because it's in one of the trackers that I use. I guess this isn't terrible. I think the reason I lean toward female so much is because I have a good number of romance novels, and the authors for those are pretty much almost all female. At least the ones that I read have definitely been all female. The one thing I see here is I have no non-binary authors. I think last year I had maybe 1 or 2 books with non-binary. So I feel like I would want to hit at least that this year, at least 1 or 2. So that might be something to add and look forward to in the coming quarter. Next, looking at race. So I just broke it down into white versus POC, and my goal was 50-50 split, and I'm not that far off. So I've got about 59% of the authors that I read being white, and then 40% or 41% approximately being people of color. And this includes pretty much anyone that is non-white. So again, I'm not quite where I want to be in terms of my goal 50-50, but I'm not extremely far off. I could definitely get this up to the 50% mark. I wish I had something to compare this to in terms of last year, but this isn't something that I had in my graphs last year, so I'm not quite sure where I stood. But at least moving forward in future quarters, I can kind of have a better idea of where I stand with this. Now, in terms of those authors, of the authors that I read, 8 of them were familiar to me. So they were authors that I had already previously read, either last year or in previous years before that. 13 of them were new to me, but not necessarily debut authors. So they're authors that I just had personally never read before. And 6 of them were debut authors. I was reading basically their debut novels. Overall, I'm definitely reading more and more books by authors that I either don't know or are new authors. And I'm pretty satisfied with that. I'm always seeking newer books in terms of, I don't like rereading from the same authors all the time. Unless it's a series, but once I'm done with the series, I do like branching out and seeing what other people have to offer. So I would say that this is a pretty good number for where I am, and I'm pretty satisfied with this. On to genres. So this is what I find the most fascinating. I don't have intense goals with genres. I think my one goal was to make sure that I read 20% nonfiction. I am pretty woefully under in terms of that metric. I've only read 9% nonfiction. I don't know why, I just haven't picked up a lot of nonfiction this year. I will say, when I look at my reading last year, I tended to pick up a lot of nonfiction in the spring and summer months. So I think that that'll ramp up as we get closer to the end of the year. And certainly we're in April and I've got like 2 nonfictions on my list. One I'm currently reading and one I hope to get to before the end of the month. So that number is gonna slowly creep up. And I feel like there's no rhyme or reason as to why I read more nonfiction in spring or summer. That just seems to be my thing. Like, I'll read a ton of fiction and I'm like, okay, maybe I should read some nonfiction, and that usually happens around the springtime. The big genres that take up most of the pie is not surprising. That's gonna be romance, mystery thriller. Mystery thriller and horror together equal what I read in romance as well. I would say that even though romance has the most number, my favorite books have been in the mystery, thriller, horror genre, and even sci-fi. There's only one sci-fi book, and it was the Blake Crouch book. That's actually one of my most favorite books of the year for sure. And that was very thrillerish as well, so I feel like it could even go into that mystery thriller category if you really wanted to. I had been hoping last year to increase my sci-fi, and so I'm probably going to look to add at least one more sci-fi book to my list this year. And then the one classic on there, that's actually Toni Morrison's book, Song of Solomon, that I read back in February, I think. I have some classics, or at least one classic that is just on my overall yearly TBR that I want to get to. But otherwise, yeah, I don't really have any specific goals for genres other than to increase my nonfiction. I think I might also decrease romance because again, a lot of these romances that I've read have been very low quality. I think I keep reading them hoping that they will get better, but definitely my favorite has been the mystery, thriller, horror, and sci-fi one, the one sci-fi that I read. And then the last thing I'll look at here is reading format. And the vast majority of my reading this year has been on my Kindle. So this guy right here is where most of my reading has been. So ebook accounts for approximately 88% of all the books that I read this year. I think I only read one physical book. I think that was Cast. I read Needful Things, which I own physically, but I really just read it all on my Kindle anyway. I don't know, I've really been into Kindle reading this year so far. It's just super convenient, and truthfully, I haven't bought any physical books since the start of the year anyway. So all the books that I had in that first book haul that I filmed, which has all the books that I got over the holidays and bought over the holidays, those are still all the books that I have. And I'm going through those, or I'm gonna be going through those this year, but I haven't bought any more physical books. Now, one thing that doesn't show up on here that I wanna mention is I have read most of my books in conjunction with the audiobook. So actually, almost every single book I read this year, with the exception of one, and that's only because the audiobook wasn't available for it, I read either the ebook or the physical book with the audiobook. There were only two that I read only audiobook, meaning I didn't have the actual book companion with it, but for the most part I was reading these together, and that's kind of become my normal reading at this point. And it feels like I can't enjoy the book as much now if I don't have both forms. I don't know if that's gonna be a problem. I guess it only is if I think it is. I personally think it's great. The only thing that might be an issue is it makes me more reluctant to read books that I can't find the audiobook for. But this has definitely been the year of audiobooks for me. I think once you really get into them, it's hard to go back because they really do add that extra element that just brings the story to life. And I think a lot of books, sometimes when I read them and then people say that they were boring, I don't think they were boring, mostly because I also had the audiobook, and the voice actors just bring the book to life a lot more than if I were just reading it. All right, and those are all of the stats in terms of the type of reading that I did so far in first quarter. And I'll leave the video off with some of my most favorite books that I read this quarter. So these are the top 6 of the 33 books that I read in quarter 1. The first one is Recursion by Blake Crouch. This is the one and only sci-fi that I have read this year, and it was fantastic. It feels like a thriller, so if you're not a huge sci-fi reader but you like thriller, I would strongly recommend that you try this out. It is just an absolute roller coaster of a ride. It was a total 5-star read. I still think back to this book from time to time, so it's like left an impression on me. Loved it. On the same note, I would also recommend The Passengers by John Mars. This is the second John Mars book that I read after the one. I liked this one a lot more, and it was very similar to Recursion in the sense that it's got a bit of sci-fi, but it is strongly a thriller read, and it will also take you on this crazy journey of like twists and turns with all of these different characters. It was also another really good read. Cast was one of the very few nonfiction books that I read this year, and Cast was awesome. So this one was a very interesting, very intriguing look at race, but through the lens of caste and comparing it to the caste system in India and also Nazi Germany. It was a very new outlook on a topic that comes up quite often, and I really appreciated it. The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. So this is the only romance that made this list. I just thought this was a whole lot of fun. I listened to this only on audio, but it was just really funny, probably the best haters to lovers that I have seen done, and I enjoyed it a lot. This is a book that I could see myself listening to again just for fun. Anxious People also makes this list. This is a more recent read. I read it in March, and Anxious People was just really fascinating. I feel like it left such an impression on me after reading it. And I feel like if you're an adult and you've dealt with adult problems, then you'll be able to relate to this book in a really strong way. And I think that's why I really loved this one so much. And last but not least, Yellow Wife is my most favorite historical fiction book that I read so far this quarter. And I just thought Yellow Wife was a really moving story full of really great characters. It's really brutal to read sometimes, but it's definitely a story that has stuck with me since I have read it. And I would recommend this one if you're really into historical fiction. All right, guys, that's the end of this video. Those are all of my stats and then my most favorite books that I read so far in quarter one. Let me know what books have made an impression, some sort of lasting impression on you so far this quarter, and what you're hoping to change as we're going into the second and third and fourth quarters of the year. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.